Hey Jake, welcome to Farside FM. I'm super excited to have you here finally. Would love to have you quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and I've enjoyed your show in the past. I think I found it from Farcaster or something, and you post on pods.media as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think I might have minted an NFT of one of your episodes at some point or something like that. But anyway, I appreciate you having me on. Quick background on myself, and I can sort of dig in, on any piece of it if it's helpful or if you're interested. But I guess best place to start is in college. After my freshman year, pretty miserable year, I knew I kind of needed a change and applied to a bunch of schools to transfer. Didn't get in any school that was like super exciting to me. I decided to drop out and try to start a company. I basically had this idea that I wanted to pursue, and I was like, well, without some other exciting option, like I might as well go for it. And I got one of the schools that I'd gotten into to sort of defer my acceptance a year. So there's kind of no risk, like worst case scenario, the company didn't work and I would go and, pick up school there or whatever. So that was like sort of the reason I started there was like sort of the first thing that I did that was like a step off the beaten path, I feel like. And it was a very transformative year for me, very positive. And, after that, the company didn't work out. I ended up going back to school, to a much better school that I didn't get into previously. Had a great time there for a few years, learned a lot, studied abroad, all that. Graduated and started my career in investment banking. Particularly was doing technology mergers and acquisitions. So learned a lot. And more than anything, probably just it's good to be surrounded by a bunch of ambitious people, even if it wasn't the exact type of ambition that I sort of wanted for the rest of my career. Definitely developed like a really strong work ethic for a couple of years there between San Francisco and New York. And then after a couple of years, I decided to leave without knowing what was next. And I traveled for a little bit and got back and started writing like pretty prolifically for 6 or 7 months. I think I published a blog post every weekday. And then I started my podcast around that time, towards the tail end of all that writing. Got to meet some awesome people through the podcast and ultimately met through the 32nd episode a guy who would become my boss, Balaji Srinivasan,
oh, nice.
someone who I'd really admired and basically just started kind of like volunteering and doing work with him and ended up serving as his chief of staff and helping him with his angel investments for a couple of years. And then about a year ago, decided to move on from that as well and have kind of been exploring what's next and following my interests as I do. And recently that sort of culminated in me launching this project called Base Colors, which I'm pretty excited about, but I'm happy to talk about any of that.
Yeah, amazing. Wait, that's such a very interesting background. I love how you kind of just went with the flow there. I think like for me, traditionally, it's just that I always had a set path in life. And then I started realizing like past college, like during college that there is no like solid path. Like I can do whatever I like to, but it was just kind of ingrained into like us as kids. I mean, for me personally, it's just here's the path you have to take. Now I like defying that, and I'm so glad to see like you are out there doing what you really enjoy. And I'm also a big fan of your podcast, Pod of Jake. I think you phenomenal. Like also your guest list is so goaded. So
Thank you.
absolutely love what you're doing there. So this is like a little bit pressure for me. I'm interviewing another podcaster, a more seasoned podcaster.
If anything, I understand what it's like to be on the other side of the table. So pressure hopefully can be taken off. I prefer going on as, I mean, I love doing my podcast, but it's a lot easier at least to go on as a guest. I feel like you can just go and say
Yeah.
whatever you want. As the host, I feel some pressure to, drive the conversation and make a good use of the guest time and everything like that. So this is fun for me and no pressure for you.
Of course, awesome. So I'm curious to understand like your journey. So you started off, of course, like building your own company that didn't work out, but you then went on to start like a podcast. So I'm curious, how did this idea of your podcast start? Why did you start it, and what was your goal with it? I know you're still continuing to do it, but what's the
Hmm.
overarching idea around it?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started my podcast, I hadn't really listened to very many podcasts before. I sort of got into listening to podcasts after starting my own. And the real motivation to start mine was just to talk to interesting people. I'd always, been interested in like reaching out to people cold who I kind of had no business getting in touch with. And I had some reasonable success with that. And podcasting was a way to sort of make it rather than like each individual person I reach out to. Because like a lot of times you reach out to someone like you're just kind of interested to be able to connect with that person and be able to talk with them. But like, it's kind of hard to think about like, what's my actual like sort of in here? Like, what's the specific thing that I'm going to sort of like ask to make this sort of an interesting thing for them to respond to or whatever. And with podcasting, you just kind of have this default thing. It's like, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? And then when I get a yes, obviously I go super deep. Like I might have already gone deep on whoever this person is beforehand, but if I haven't and I've just kind of like had this more surface level of interest,
Hmm.
then once they say yes, I just basically consume everything they've ever put out online, or every podcast they've done or every blog they've written, and learn all about their company and all of their interests. And I really enjoy that, just like deep research
Yeah.
on an individual and everything that they're interested in. Um, and so, over the years, podcasting has basically become like, on the one hand, a way to meet awesome people. On another hand, a way to sort of build a bit of a following for myself. And then thirdly, it's been sort of like a cadence for learning where, I have a guest on the schedule. I learn everything about them that I can in like a week, but it's time constrained. And like once I record that episode with them, it's got to be kind of like on to the next. And then I get on to the next person. And so one week I might be learning a ton about like sort of nuclear power or something
Yeah.
like that. And then the next week I'm going all in on Bitcoin or whatever it is. And it's basically just informed by these people. Like it's very people first. Like I care much more about the
Okay.
people than the topic. And,
Yeah.
I don't subject my episodes based on like me and so talking about this particular subject. Like it's very people focused. And that's just sort of aligned with my interests. And
Yeah.
so it's been a ton of fun. It's been like 3 or 4 years now. And I'm not like a super goals oriented person, I would say. I'm much more focused on process and sort of doing things that I like to do and doing them the way that I want to do them. And so the podcast has been more of that and less of like, I'm seeking to get, X number of listeners or
Yeah.
Y number of downloads or whatever it is. It's something that I could do for the rest of my life. And some years I might produce, 20 episodes, other years it might be 50, and other years it might be two. But I have this outlet now where I can talk to interesting people and,
Yeah.
get some listeners more than just myself. So it's been a lot of fun.
I absolutely love that. And I think even with my journey, I can relate to it an extent where I think I did start off with like a specific topic around Farcaster, interesting people on Farcaster. But then I kind of realized that after like seeing your podcast and like others as well, like your episodes really give a taste of who you are as a person and what your tastes and interests are. And it's so important that you've made this podcast like something that you are interested in. So for
Hmm.
me, I think I started off with that topic and now I'm realizing like, oh, I don't want to just stay in this topic. I have other interests I do want to explore and I want to use this podcast as a means to do that. So I
Yeah.
really love having it as that tool. To get like allow myself to explore stuff I've always wanted to through conversations with people that I find interesting.
Yeah. I think if you start from a place of like an objective of maximizing audience or something like that, you
Yeah.
end up doing a very different thing. Like obviously, maybe not obviously, but it seems pretty clear that the way to get a large audience fast on the internet is to do something like very specific
Yeah.
and sort of constrain yourself within a very particular niche, and then sort of dominate that niche and then grow from that niche. But if it's not fun and it's not interesting,
Yeah.
like what's the point? And so
Agree.
for me, I just, like this winter, I was interviewing basketball coaches. Most of the people who
What?
listen to my podcast are pretty tech forward. Like there's a lot of crypto people. And, I don't really care. Like I want to talk to a basketball coach. I'm going to talk to a basketball coach. I'm going to put it on my podcast. And if you want to listen, you can listen. And if you don't want to listen, you don't have to listen. But it's always going to be people that I'm genuinely interested in. That's like the number one sort of bar, like in terms of quality. It has to be like above a certain bar of quality. That's why I don't take a lot of like inbound requests for guests either,
Yeah.
because if I didn't sort of discover them and proactively reach out, it's probably just not as interested as the people that I would proactively reach out to. Nothing against that person. It's just like needs to be kind of more organic. So I'm a big believer in just sort of like following your interests, and it might not produce the biggest audience ever, but I tend to think that you might get more out of it in the long run.
Oh yeah, 100%. I love that you're staying true to that principle and, kind of prioritizing that quality for yourself. That's awesome. And so I it seems that like you love to experiment in terms of stuff that you really enjoy, right? Like taking this podcast as one medium. Now also now if we move forward and talk about like base colors, where did base colors come from, right? So you started as chief of staff, then you have your podcast, and now there's more of like a design artist sort of side of you, where you produced base colors. What's the story behind it? Also, I love the collection, by the way. I think it's super unique.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's interesting, the origin story. The idea, I'd followed NFTs when like the hype cycle came out. I wasn't into it back. And when I say hype cycle, I'm talking about like 2021 or so, like Bored Apes coming out and everything like that. Um, I, I wasn't really following it too much with like CryptoPunks before that and Crypto Kitties and whatever else. I was aware of it, but just, it wasn't really a big thing until I would say 2021, just for most people generally, unless you were like deep in NFTs for whatever reason. And so when it became more popular, I kind of paid some attention, and I just wasn't that interested. I was, still mostly interested in like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like I tend to be pretty fundamental in what I'm interested in, and pretty like risk averse from some. It's kind of a weird combination. Like people in traditional finance or whatever, traditional investors would view me as like extremely risky because I have like such a high allocation of my personal money and, crypto at large. But most of that is Bitcoin and Ethereum. So people within crypto are like, you're so risk averse. And it's like this weird sort of in
Mm,
between thing. And so I guess partly for that reason, I never got too into NFTs. It's like, okay, I still think Bitcoin is a pretty high risk asset. I still think Ethereum is a pretty high risk asset. I don't need to be buying monkey JPEGs or whatever and having like this super risky asset in my personal portfolio. And I played around with the less expensive stuff, but the interesting, the more popular things were like very expensive. And so I just kind of couldn't play or didn't want to play at least. Um,
mm,
and I started thinking about though, like what would be interesting to me in like the NFT world. And I don't know if it was even explicitly like searching for something as much as it just came to me, but I had this idea of like, obviously I've had this blue dot on my podcast for a long time. And I've always been interested in things that are fundamental. Like the reason I had the blue dot in the first place, because I thought it was the most fundamental color and the most fundamental shape, being, a circle and the color blue. And it's not just any blue, but it's like the hex code for it is 0000FF, which is like, white is FF, and
yeah.
black is 000000. So that's like, it's
Oh,
basically maximally blue. Yeah.
that's
I don't know
so
if you knew that, but
interesting. Fun
yeah. So
fact.
it's like a special hex code, and it's like the blue basically. And so I didn't choose it like sort of arbitrarily. And then, with the circle, I could have chose a square or whatever, but I thought circle was pretty good. And, um, so with those things, like I guess I just was sort of predisposed to think about like what's a fundamental NFT collection. And to me, like color is like the most fundamental element of all art. Like you could
Yeah.
argue, lines or shapes or something like that, but pretty much all art has color, and that's kind of what makes it beautiful. And like in a lot of cases, at least, like obviously there's black and white stuff, but um, I sort of had this idea, and then I sort of got looking, and I was like, well, there's this model called the RGB model, which is like the universal standard for digital colors. Like there is a collection of colors that we all agree is like the collection for colors on the internet, on TV, basically anything digital. And I was like, well, that seems like something that would lend itself towards being like a very interesting digital collection if you could make it so that every color could only have one owner. And then it was years later when I just launched it that sort of in building it, I realized it would be really interesting to give each of them a one of one name as well. So you can now get a color and you're the only person who can own that color, and you can give that color a name and you're the only person who can use that name. And so it wasn't like some, thing that I like sought out to make an NFT collection or anything like that, but it just sort of emerged. And this was a few years ago, like I said. And then it kind of like stayed near the top of interesting ideas that I was thinking about for a long time. And at a certain point I was like, okay, it's, I'm gonna go build this.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. So you kind of just took, first of all, like this whole concept of the hex and the I was gonna ask you what's your favorite color, and I was like, okay, he has a blue dot, so it definitely is blue. But like it's lovely that the way you come across like that specific color. I think that's super interesting. I never ever thought about colors like that. So so this is cool. So you had like this sort of idea in your pipeline for a while. You're just someone who kind of has like all these really cool ideas, and you want to end up executing them at a single point in your lifetime. And so base colors is one of that. And how have you seen kind of this being received by the NFT community or the artist community? What have they thought about it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like sort of having this list of ideas, I've always been someone who, has like a lot of notes on my phone with like the Apple Notes or whatever, and on my computer. And I basically I originally just kind of collected these ideas in random notes, and then more recently, in like maybe a year ago or so, I started trying to collect the ones that felt like things that could expand into potentially large things, or just ones that I wanted to like keep in a certain list. I added to this list that I was calling seeds.
Oh,
This was partly inspired by Rick Rubin's book, where he gave a name to these things that I'd sort of been collecting on my own, and he called them seeds. And I thought that was a really interesting name and a good name, so kind of went with it. And basically, like, you collect all these ideas, and you don't really know when you have a seed, what the potential thing that could grow out of it is. And sometimes they can be deceiving. Like sometimes they seem really small and maybe not that interesting, and other times they seem like they could be potentially huge. But you
yeah,
might start working on the small one and it just starts growing. And that was kind of this. I thought this was just kind of like a fun little weekend project, like NFT project for colors. Like, okay. And then as I started working on it, it just kept growing, and I kept getting more and more excited about it and realizing more and more things that I thought I could do with it. And that's kind of how it goes. At least that's how I found it to go with seeds. And it's like, you just kind of have to start and plant it. And then as you kind of like water it, so to speak, you just see like, is this thing growing really fast, or is this thing kind of just like a dud? And it's really hard to predict based on just the seed itself. You really have to like sort of plant it and
experiment with it.
water it. And yeah, I've planted a bunch of seeds in the last year, but also going back a long time before that. And some of them you just kind of have to know when to move on, and when to keep watering, and when to sort of like focus and double down.
Hmm.
And so in terms of the reception from like the NFT community, it's been very positive. I don't know why I say that with a bit of hesitation. I guess the numbers, I set really high expectations for myself on
Mm.
launch in terms of the numbers, because you kind of have to shoot for the moon to land in the stars. And so the numbers weren't quite what I expected, but the like sort of qualitative response has been far above what I could have expected. Like, people are responding in a way that is much more emotional, using words like love,
Oh, yeah.
much more so than I expected. And I think it's because colors are sort of this, like it's a fundamental thing that they just carry a lot more meaning for most people than really anything else I can really think of. And that's not like every color is meaningful to every person, not at all. But it's weird. I didn't realize, like, I knew that I had this blue that was meaningful to me,
Yeah.
and I might have some other colors that are meaningful to me too. Like, just as a stupid example, like, I've always been a Jets fan of, like, for the football
Yeah.
team, and so like Jets green, I'm like, okay, like that's kind of cool. That has some meaning, or like your alma mater or whatever.
Right.
But my like the most valuable color to me personally is like my blue, and I just didn't realize that everyone would have something like that. But it kind of turns out that they do, and everyone's like kind of got a color that like immediately comes to mind when they realize they can buy any color they want. And then they look up the hex code and they get it and they name it, and it's like a really meaningful experience for them. So that's been very cool. And that's just the initial launch. So we'll see what happens. But so far so good on the reception, I'd say.
Yeah, it's amazing. And when you reached out about the FBI color, and I saw that, I'm like, it means so much when you see a color that represents something that you have been working on or building upon. I think you're correct on that sense of identity, that some colors hold, especially for certain people. And to me, when I saw that FBI color, I was like, wow, like this kind of just hit on a different level for me. Like, yeah, you can make an like FBI NFT, but the color itself, like when you own that color, it feels so good. I don't know how to explain it, and it's just so different. I just have never seen colors expressed in this sort of medium before. Like, yeah, people talk about colors a lot in terms of, certain colors evoke certain emotions, right? Certain colors tell certain stories. Like, there's so many modes of interpretation for a single color. For me, my favorite color is blue and red. I have these two different shades that like all
Mm.
hold certain different meanings in my life. But if you were to tell me what's my favorite color, I will tell you blue. Um, but yeah, like I think I just see when I saw the project, I'm like, this is so different than most NFT projects I've ever seen. And I think it's also because a lot of NFT projects have a specific vision, so they're not really that abstract. I think like the most abstract ones I've been seeing were like swatches, or like what you're building right now with base colors. And I think with that abstractness, you're giving people a way to play with it and interpret them in their own meaning. So some people will find it a lot more emotional, while others find it more like as a collection. So I find that really cool to like, as a base thing, to start iterating upon. Like, what if the next iteration of base colors is base palettes, right? Like a palette to
Mm-hmm.
represent a flag, like something like that, you know?
Yeah, and what's so cool about it too is like, I agree with you. Colors, like they're just applicable in so many ways. Like you can attach them to your mood or whatever, like any of these things you named, and then a million other things. And the cool thing about crypto is like, I don't have to go build all those things. Like I
Yeah.
can build base colors, and then anyone can go build whatever they want with base colors or referencing the collection, and giving people who own certain colors like certain abilities that you don't have if you don't own the certain colors. And so I'm excited to see what people will do with that. There's been a couple experiments just in, we've only been launched for like 2 weeks, and I've seen a couple experiments within the last like 2 days that people are using. Like one guy made this frame that you could basically upload an image and, put a base hat on the whatever the image is, and like that you could change the color of the hat if you own to any like base color that you own, basically. And
Oh,
then someone else did something with like basically a meme generator, and you could change the colors in the meme to any base colors that you own. And those are just like, a couple examples, but there's basically limitless examples of things that people could do with stuff like that. So I'm pretty excited to see like, ideally people would really build with base colors a lot. Like there's kind of no reason not to, and it's just colors. Like it's pretty easy. Even if you just have any app, you can kind of give the user the ability to configure their interface with a different color like you see on Twitter or whatever. um,
yeah.
so it's pretty easy to apply it in a minimal way, and then maybe some people also apply it in sort of a more heavy duty way, which it's not only up to me to like build that, but also I couldn't possibly imagine as many like use cases as people can come up with. So it's great to sort of like outsource not only the execution but sort of the imagination in that sense.
Yeah, like really building that community. Yeah, I totally get that. You know what would be super cool? I just like this idea popped up. Have you seen those like Reddit, like the r/place, where it's like a public canvas where people can draw?
Well, so like base paint or something like that.
Yeah,
Are you
like
familiar with that?
similar. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
similar. I like it would be so cool if you could do that, right? For base color. So like let's say because I own the purple color, I can come on to this canvas and like draw something in that purple color, and whoever owns certain colors can go into the canvas and just draw stuff. And it's like a huge public canvas. I think that would be super cool. Um,
Yeah, no, that's great. And like base paint is kind of like a similar thing, on base. And if anyone wants to do anything like that, I think it would be super cool. And more generally, like obviously NFTs all involve like any art NFTs involve color in some sense. And so if you were to sort of like build a collection which enables the owner of a given NFT to change the colors of the NFT based on the base colors that they own, that could be like a pretty cool thing.
yeah,
And again, there's just like a million things. It's hard to sort
there's
of
so many
narrow
ideas.
in on the best ones, but yeah, I'm hopeful that people out there who are more imaginative than me can come up with some good ideas.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm curious, when you launched Base Colors, did you like mainly launch it for the Farcaster community, or like was it also meant for Twitter as well?
Yeah, I wanted to be Farcaster first, not Farcaster only though. So we launched
Mhm.
on Farcaster. That was like our first public post, and then soon after on Twitter. And I guess the reason for Farcaster first, more so just gut feeling, I guess, than anything else. But if I had to sort of like put a rationale on it, I've been on Farcaster now for, I don't know, I feel like at least a couple of years, which is, I was like user 1020 or something like that. So like
Wow.
pretty early. And, in the beginning, I was just like cross post my tweets and
Yeah.
sometimes see some interesting content on Farcaster. And it's since, sort of flipped for me where I spend more time and enjoy Farcaster more than Twitter. There's
Yeah.
just like sort of more that you can do with it. And Twitter, I just kind of am like sick of like all the junk
Yeah.
basically that it
Understand.
serves me. So Farcaster has been a ton of fun. And I guess I just wanted to kind of like pay my respects in a sense. And obviously also it's it's a crypto first community. So if you're going to start somewhere, not only is it crypto first, but it's like very base dominant. And so if you're going to build something on base, I think it makes a lot of sense to launch it on Farcaster first and then try to expand from that to like, crypto Twitter. And then ideally
Mm,
for base colors, like the big goal is, I think colors, as we've talked about, they're a universally appealing thing. It's not something like super niche. It's colors. And so
yeah.
if I can take this universally appealing thing and also give it a user experience with the website that's universally accessible, and then offer the mint price is like 0.001 ETH, which is like $3, so it's like a universally affordable price. I think it's something that can actually reach outside of not only outside of Farcaster, not only outside of like NFT collectors, but outside of crypto entirely, and really bring some people who have never been interested in crypto
Hmm.
at all into doing things on chain for the first time just by buying and naming colors.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like especially this taps heavily into like the artist community and just getting their attention. I feel like, of course, like colors, I mean, to me, is something that artists would instantly like get interested in. And so, you have, like you were mentioning, there's so many different directions you can go with base colors. So how are you viewing kind of the way you want to grow this project? Is there like a specific idea you want to iterate upon, or like how do you plan on growing it? Like what's your view timeline for that?
Yeah, I want to be careful about like putting out any, expectations or promises or roadmaps or anything like that. And obviously, I have ideas, and I'm actively working on stuff as well. Like, what's the next thing that we're going to do and whatnot. But I'm like choosing not to really talk about it too much because
Mm,
um, I just feel that like this whole NFT space, not to speak to like every project, but in aggregate, like the average NFT project has like all of these ambitious things that they put
yeah,
out, and then like at the end of the day it's still just like a JPEG. And like, not to like demean NFTs or anything like that, but it's like it's just the art basically, not to like say you go the whole like it's just a JPEG thing, but it's basically just art. And there's not really like any utility. And so
right.
I certainly don't want to promise like any utility or any like big metaverse that we're building, or like something like that. It's just like it's colors. If you like colors, we're not talking about something that's like $10,000 here. It's $3. Like, you can buy a color, you can name a color. If you have a friend or family member or something that you'd like to onboard into crypto, a good way to do that might be to buy a color and name a color and send it to them.
Mhm.
And it's like just dead simple. But on
Yeah,
the other hand, people, if they want to like really dig deep and go in, they can like have all these theories as to what colors might be like perceived as more valuable to more people than others. And based on the hex code, or the color itself, or the names, it's like at the end of the day, it's a naming system that's not so different from like an ENS or domain names or Twitter handles or whatever. So the names, even independent of the colors, could potentially be valuable at some point. And so I think there's just like enough there that it's like there's little enough there that it's so simple for anyone who just wants to like dabble or do their first thing in crypto. But there's also enough like depth there that someone who wants to go like totally down the rabbit hole and get obsessed has like plenty of
yeah.
room to do so. And I really like that balance.
Yeah, that's actually, I am so happy you said that because, of course, like before, like a couple years ago when NFTs were like a big hype, like all the projects had like these timelines where they were like, um, okay, we're gonna build this community, then we're gonna enable like this feature, this perk, and like people viewed NFT collections as a form of investment where they expect like stuff in return. Um, And I feel like that does take away, especially like as from an artist point of view. Let's say I'm an artist, I just like putting stuff out there, like not necessarily like taking one and like growing it to like 10x. Maybe I just like want to distribute a specific collection and let it kind of flow into the hands of people that actually just value the art over the utility of it or the perks of it. And I think like now we're starting to see that where we can put out art. Like I just put out like I think 2 months ago like this meditation collection on base just because I really liked the idea of like showing meditation through art in the form of enlightenment. Like there was like meditation across all these different people from like different areas of the world. It's just supposed to show like a unitedness thing.
Was
It's just a
it was it
collection.
like audio? Was it like audio recordings or like art or both?
It's just it literally just a piece of art. I'll send you like a picture of it. It's just that it's a there are like 200 of them, and they're
Mm.
all images of like people from different parts of the world, different ages, genders, whatever,
Hmm.
meditating. Um,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, so it's just like a small idea I had. I was like, okay, I just want to put this out as an NFT, spread awareness of meditation, right? Like, just put it out. I don't have any intention of growing it. If you like the art, like, please, like, you can collect the art, right? There's nothing more than that. Like, if you want to do something with it, you please go ahead and do so. So I really like how you said, like, there should be that balance where, you've provided enough of a base for your project that anyone can do stuff with it if they want to. But like you single-handedly don't have to actually go and grow that project yourself, right? Like if the community wants to take it forward, they can, right? It's all up to their interpretation. I think that's how it should be, right? So that we can go and like continue to do other stuff for the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely well, there's a few elements of it. Like it was definitely very deliberate in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And when it's something so simple, you can you sort of have the freedom to and the time to be so deliberate about the details. Like if you have something that's like really complex, there's just so many details that you can't really be deliberate about all of them. But
Yeah.
when you have something that's fundamentally very simple, even if you go down to like the nitty gritty details, like there's just not that far down to go because there's like the top level elements are like only like three things or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I was able to be like very deliberate about a lot of the details. And I would say in terms of the utility thing, yeah, I mean, you see this not just with NFTs, but with crypto in general. And like, where there's opportunities for utility, that's great. Obviously, like to have things be useful is great. But in terms of, pure value, the most valuable cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is like not really that, like, it's not really like a high utility thing. It's like,
Yeah.
it's a store of value. And, that's a utility in and of itself. But like it's not being used for payments as was sort of initially intended or theorized. Like, people are doing the NFTs on it now or whatever. But like in general, it's just dead simple. It's just digital gold.
Yeah.
And all of these other, projects that are claiming these, various elements of utility, it's like, well, once you have an element of utility, then that utility sort of has a range of how valuable
Correct.
that might be. And there's sort of like a low and a high end of what that utility could be, but it's sort of constrained. And if you have something that doesn't pose to have really any utility, then it's sort of just leaning in on the speculative nature that a lot of crypto projects are benefiting from anyway, and just
Yeah.
being very explicit about like this is purely speculative. And it might turn out that the thing that leans in on being purely speculative actually ends up having some utility, but it's not posed that way and it's not promised in any way. And like I think in some ways the utility can almost be a ceiling on value, whereas like, how much do I value my blue? Like if this collection
Yeah.
existed and someone else owned my blue, I would probably, and I was confident that this was going to be like the collection for colors. I would pay like a good deal for my blue just because I value it. Like not because
Right.
I could do anything with it, but I just value it. And if it was like something where it was like, this collection is explicitly for the utility of like, if you, have this color, then you can, do like let's use our example earlier. It's a good example, but if it was like explicitly only able to be used for, the Reddit example that you mentioned earlier of like painting, it's like, okay, well, I really love my blue, but I don't actually really care about like this Reddit painting thing. So, I don't really care. Like it's not that valuable to me.
Yeah.
But if it's just like the more abstract, less utility attached, this is the collection for colors and this is blue, then I definitely want it. So I think I like the lack of utility up front.
Yeah.
And if it turns out to have some utility over time, then fine. But we're not going to promise anything that's like not already existing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And honestly, I see this lack of utility as a culture, right? Like you're building a culture. And I see that as a form of utility. So like I think the way we've seen it, NFTs progress is that they had very specific utility, and now it's becoming more like exponentially abstract, where the utility is no longer something specific. It's just like you've built yourself a culture. There's a culture of colors, and
Right.
so I want to engage with that, and I think that's
Yeah.
a
And
lot more
like,
powerful.
and enjoyment, I think, is utility to some. I
Yeah,
mean, like utility is just a word, right? We could define it however we want. But if you look at a piece of art on the wall and you enjoy it, like that art doesn't really have utility. But I would argue that by most people's definitions at least. But like I would argue that having something on the wall that you can look at and enjoy is utility.
Yeah.
And so, it's up to people like to define utility how they want and determine whether a given project actually has it or whatever. But I basically just don't want to get involved in the whole mess, and
That
like
makes
people
sense.
can figure that out for themselves. But we're just going to kind of keep it as simple as we can.
Yeah. You have just put so much out there in the public, like with your podcast, like your writing. And why do you still choose to be anonymous?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a few reasons, but the ultimate reason I would say is like just a gut instinct that it's the right thing to do. I think to get into the reasons a little bit, I think that people, the internet is still relatively new. Obviously not like new, but 35 years old or whatever it is, and in terms of like social media and stuff, more like 20 years or so. And I don't think people really appreciate the way that the internet interacts with like the real world yet. And I value privacy in general. Like I like to be able to walk around in New
Mhm.
York and like have anonymity. I'm not the type of person that would like to like be recognized in public.
Mm.
And so it sounds sort of like arrogant or something maybe to worry about like being recognized in public when you're nobody. Like, I have like 3,000 followers. So it's like, no one's going to recognize you, dude. Like, relax. But the internet is exponential. Like, you can, I had no followers 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Like 0 to 3,000. Does that in 10 years become 30,000? And like, what's the level at which you start to be recognized in public? And then, you know, you can call it arrogant or whatever you want, but like I'm not out here living in a way that I'm trying to like not do something important in the world. And so if I end up doing something important or, becoming a more influential person, like I'm still pretty young. If I do that in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, like I don't want to have like my Twitter has my headshot on it and my
Yeah.
first and last name. And like, I mean, look at these, like as an extreme example, look at these celebrities' kids. Like these kids'
Yeah.
lives are like so messed up.
I know,
Um,
right?
and so I just really value like the ability to do whatever I want online because it's just incredible. Like I put out a podcast and people from 50 different countries are listening or whatever. Like it's just amazing. Like I would never want to cut myself off from the internet, but I do want to cut myself off in terms of like having my, face and like full name and like family information or whatever just get that big of reach because it's just astounding reach and there's just like no need for it from my perspective. I don't think it adds anything. And if anything, I share much more freely because I have this sort of like pseudonymous layer
Mm.
where I can just be exactly myself, say exactly what I want. I don't say my last name and I don't tell you where I went to college or whatever. But other than that, like, I'll talk about whatever. And
Yeah.
so in a way, like I think pseudonymity actually encourages authenticity on the internet and people don't really realize that. So there's like a bunch of reasons, but that's sort of a flavor for why I've stayed pseudonymous so far. And I think I'll continue to do so.
Yeah. I really admire that. That's awesome. I'm so glad you like a lot of people aren't clear as to why. Like I feel like so many people I know, I mean, I don't know. Sorry. I see a lot of anonymous users on the internet for the reason that they can do whatever and say whatever they want to without being charged for it.
Right.
But I'm glad, like, I had talked to Proxy about this too before, and he said a very similar reason as to you. But I also think it comes, doesn't it? When you started your podcast and you were anonymous, how did that even work for you? Like, how were you even able to build up that credibility even though you're anonymous? Like, a lot of people I know wouldn't, there's a struggle for you there, right? Being anonymous in terms of putting
Yeah.
stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, being pseudonymous is definitely a hindrance to building an audience because people like a face, like people,
Yeah.
they see you on the YouTube video or whatever, it builds trust. They feel like they know you better. People just like faces and names. It's just what it is. So not offering that and only offering a blue dot in its place is like not super helpful to build trust and get people to like you or whatever. But it's a trade off that I've been willing to make, and it's cool too because without like showing your face or whatever, and these various other things that come with being doxxed or whatnot, like you can have more confidence that people are engaging with you sort of on merit of your
Yeah.
ideas or whatever. And so like, I never in like my podcast invites, like when I send it to guests, like I'm not like sending my resume or like telling them my background. Like if to the extent that there's any credentials, they're just based on the podcast. Like, here are my previous guests and like, here's how many episodes I've done or whatever. Or here's my website and here's my Twitter. But not using like, I don't know, I guess it was hard to go from 0 to 1. Definitely got a little bit lucky, but the first, I'll go back to like the very first episode with Aubrey de Grey. I'd emailed him. He's like big in the longevity space. I'd emailed him and one other guy in the longevity space, basically inviting him on my podcast. And at the time, I didn't have a podcast, but when he said yes, I decided to make one.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so like, I just kind of got lucky. He said yes, and I'm sure if he didn't, I probably would have ended up starting one anyway. But maybe not for a couple of years. Like that's kind of the way things go. If you don't start, you might not start ever, and if you do, maybe it'll be a couple of years before you do. So I was lucky that he responded then. Since then, it's just been, once you're started, it's like, hey, I've got a podcast. You can check it out here, and if you want to come on, would love to have you. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
What has been like one of your favorite episodes from your
Oh,
interview?
I don't know if I can choose favorites. I'm trying to think. It's actually been shocking to me. I don't know, maybe not shocking, but I'm pretty surprised. I've done 170 something of these things, and I would say that there's like 2 that I was like afterwards, like didn't really
Whoa.
enjoy that. Like that was, maybe a little bit of a rough one or whatever. Didn't really connect with the person, but I'm
Yeah.
generally very surprised, like about just, these are like people I really like respect and admire, and I get on and they're just like reasonable people who are really enjoyable to talk to. And, they're not so different from me and you. Even these
Yeah.
people who have built these like big, great things, tends to be, pretty humble beginnings and just kind of following their interests, trusting their gut and putting one foot in front of the other until next thing you know, they've kind of changed the world in some sense. And that's pretty inspiring to me.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's so funny when like you admire this person, like these people a lot, and then when you're finally like face to face, you realize they're just like a regular human. um, I the starstruck thing for me, like I think when I had Jesse on, I was like, oh my God, I have to be like super professional, like, oh, it's Jesse, like, but it was so chill. Like you just realize they're a normal human. You're just having a fun conversation at the end of the day, and like that barrier should not ever be there. I feel like that just hinders a lot of the way you communicate and connect with that person. Um, but just very interesting for me, especially this is like starting to get into that more.
Yeah. And you definitely like with, I guess the more you do them and the further out you reach into people who you like don't know so well or whatever. One thing I've realized is, people who can seem a little bit extreme in some of their perspectives on Twitter. But they were interesting enough for me to like reach out and learn more. And then I'll have them on the podcast and they're like totally reasonable.
Yeah,
A lot of their extremity or whatever you want to call it is like, I think a result of the platform and like the character limits and just the
yeah,
things that, Twitter kind of rewards in terms of engagement. Like it doesn't reward nuanced, long takes. It rewards short, snappy,
correct.
controversial takes. And so that's what people give it. And,
Yeah,
for example, I've had like a number of Bitcoin maximalists on my podcast. And in general, I think, Bitcoin maximalists are a bit extreme. Again, in general, not all of them by any means, but, the people I've had on, like we have conversations like, well, actually, if you really dig down into sort of their perspective, it's really not very different from mine. We might have some sort of fundamental disagreement on something, but at the end of the day, most of my crypto investment is in Bitcoin as well. Like I'm to some extent a Bitcoin maximalist myself, but I'm not out there tweeting that everything else is a shitcoin or whatever. So
yeah,
it's just interesting. You talk to people and you realize, I think in general, that people are a lot more reasonable than they might seem and a lot more likable than they might seem, just based on like their tweets and other people's tweets about them and media headlines and whatnot. Like I think you can't really judge a person until you've given them sort of a shot with like listening to them long form, or if they've read a book, that's good too. But even books are like, they have like ghostwriters and whatnot. I think honestly, listening to someone long form on a podcast is kind of the best way to get to know someone short of meeting
yeah.
them.
Wow. Yeah, highly definitely agree with you on that. And like, I know you also have like this life advice series. So I have a question, right? You were talking about seeds and planting these seeds and how you have a list of like a bunch of seeds that you eventually want to plant.
Yeah.
How do you decide which one of those to take up? And when you do take up one seed, do you also take up multiple at the same time, or you just focus on one at a time? Because the reason I'm asking this is because I find myself in a similar boat where I have a lot of ideas and I can't decide which one I should take up. And if I do take up one, I end up taking like three at the same time and kind of spread myself out too thin.
Right.
How do you go about that?
Yeah, I think the short answer is like the only rule is that there's no rules. So
Mm.
there's no like, you can only take up one at a time or you always have to take three at a time or whatever. Um, there's just there's no one answer. But I would say most of the time I go through sort of periods of like I'm planting, I've maybe got like two planted and I'm kind of like watering them and like I want to plant another one and then, see where they all go. And this plant isn't really doing anything. So I'm going to stop kind of working on that. And I'm going to put more emphasis on these. And like, it's just a constant balance as I think like most of life, like the best analogy actually I've come with or like visual metaphor that I've come up with for life. This gets like a little philosophical or whatever, but like, I don't know. I actually have to figure out what the thing is called, but like, a balance where it's like, there's like a scale on two sides and like you can put something on one side and like, it's like kind of like a seesaw, like the balance will tilt to one side or the other.
Yeah.
So picture one of those, but it's one of those. And there's like, instead of just two sides, there's like 12 different like platforms. You could put weights on all of them. And
Oh,
like the whole thing is like this like dynamic balance. And that's kind of what I think about like life as like there might be like one plate for like health and you drop like a couple, granules of salt on there or whatever. And then like there's another one for family and there's another one for friends and there's another one for work. And then like you might have three different ones for three different projects that you're working on or one for the podcast. And life is just, you always basically time is the salt. And so like time is always happening and so you always have to allocate salt to like one of these different platforms and the balance is always shifting. Like you can't just hit a perfect balance and like stay still because time is always happening. Like you're always doing stuff. And so you're always allocating these weights. And so the way that I kind of try to live is like, if things feel really out of balance, I need to like sort of put some more weight on one of the other balances. Like if I'm
mm,
really obsessed with work and not paying attention to my fitness at all, like maybe it's
yeah.
time to get back in the gym. If I haven't called my family in a while because I've been, you know, hanging out with friends too much or something, like it's time to call home. And so just like constantly figuring out this balance. And I think work is no different. Like with these seeds, it's like if you have one thing that you're really enjoying working on, like just go all in. But if you're
Yeah.
looking for the next thing, then like plant a few seeds, see if anything grows. Like if it starts to grow, then like really start to give it the attention. And next thing you know, like you're obsessed and like literally not sleeping working on base colors because like, you planted a seed and it started growing a lot and you got really into it.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's like any one way to go about it basically, but I would definitely encourage like the simple practice of writing down these seeds in one place and like having a large list of them. And then you can kind of like review it once in a while and just like as you're reading through them, be like, just be aware of like one jumping out at you. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
have a logic for pursuing it. Just like if it
See.
calls to you to do something with it, take the first smallest step that you can do. It doesn't need to be a big thought out plan. Just like what's the one thing that I could do in like a day to start that, like to plant that seed and do that and then see if something else follows. And if nothing else follows, like no worries.
Yeah. Move on to the next. Yeah. Love that. That helps me so much. I needed someone to tell me that, like verbally.
That
Um,
felt like a massive tangent. So I'm glad you took something out of it.
no, no, I like that was a brilliant tangent. I feel like a lot of people do need to hear this, especially in the forecaster space as well. Everyone's kind of just doing their own experiments, which is amazing. I think it's like an experimentation playground.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's awesome. So what's next for you? Like, what's sprouting for you in terms of like what are you interested in? Doesn't have to be necessarily crypto, I guess, but like what's on your mind lately?
Yeah. I am really like, I'm all in on base colors right now. And I didn't seek to do that or expect that to be the case, but I've just kind of fallen in and have no reason to try to climb out. So I'm working really hard on it, trying to make something that I feel is great, and hope some other people agree. And then while doing that, like I wasn't just making up crazy examples earlier when I was talking about, you know, losing focus on fitness and stuff like that. Like I haven't been in the gym in like 3 weeks and haven't been eating enough and like all this,
Mm.
haven't been sleeping enough. So I need to restore a little bit of balance. But other than that, I'm focused on base colors. Obviously, I'm continuing going with the podcast. Hopefully, we'll continue to release like I don't know every week or two. And I try to like kind of hold a cadence because it's easy. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. Like I said, I'm going to be doing this for hopefully for the rest of my life. And so,
Yeah.
like if in a given year I don't put out too many podcasts, like that's kind of fine. And yeah, just kind of going about my business. Family, friends, health, base colors.
Lovely. So for base colors, what are you up to right now? Like, is it, so I know you put out like a couple bounties, so you are planning to build some more stuff on top of it.
Yeah, well, I sort of put out this bounty for other people to build on top of it, whatever they want, to try to like ignite this, decentralized building. But myself and basically my lead developer on it are working on some things now. And like for the reasons I said earlier, I don't want to like allude to too many promises or anything, but I'm excited about what we're doing, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get it shipped and out there, and hopefully people will like it.
Awesome. Well, that's lovely. I'm really excited for the future of base colors, and uh, good luck for everything ahead with that. And I'm excited for also all your future podcast episodes. Always will be a fan. Um, well, it's been so absolutely very lovely talking to you. Thank you for all that life advice. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will find that useful, especially I feel like we need more of that on podcasts. It's not talked about enough. Um,
Yeah, maybe someone should start a life advice channel. I'm like
that's
kind of a
you.
one. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm kind of a one channel guy. Like I had wanted to make a channel of some kind for a while, didn't know exactly, what it was gonna be, and then now I've got Base Colors channel, which I'm casting in probably more than anyone would want to see. But I'm having fun with it, and if there's a life advice channel, I can definitely tell you I would, participate and follow. But
You don't know
it's
about
uh
doing it.
it's not on me to create it. And also for what it's worth, I think I'm not a huge fan of like generalized life advice. Like there's certain
Yeah.
things that are helpful, but the reason I like doing these calls is because I basically just ask questions. I really don't like give a whole lot of what people would consider to be like advice. I just ask a bunch of questions and hope that the person kind of hope that I can get to a question that is sort of the right question for the person to have to explicitly think about and answer. And then
Yeah.
they have the answer themselves. Like they just haven't really thought of that correct question or been forced to answer it before.
Exactly.
So that's why I really enjoy it. And if it was just like tweeting life advice or whatever, like, I'm prone to try to do that just like the next person, but I think it's generally a little bit less valuable. So
That's absolutely brilliant. And I think that is how it should go. I'm so glad that's the mental model, right, for that. Amazing. Okay, before we end off, I have a quick rapid fire round. It's like just three, four
nice.
questions, fun ones.
Great.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. First question: would you rather have 50,000 DGen or the OG NFT?
OG NFT. I love DGen though.
Why? Why the OG NFT?
Just my first answer that comes to me. I have one,
I
and I
love it.
am one, and I like it. And I could always buy DGen, but the OG NFT, I feel like I guess you could buy that as well, but it feels more earned.
That's so valid. Okay, good answer. All right, the second question: if you could travel right now, anywhere in this world for a FarCon conference, where would you want to host it, and where would you want to travel to?
Florence, Italy.
Florence. Oh, very cool. I've actually never been there. Interesting
It's my
choice.
favorite city in the world.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so I'm looking forward to FarCon there. All right. Next question. Who are your top three favorite builders, artists, or people on Farcaster right now for you at this moment?
Top three favorite builders and artists. I'll start with you. Then I'll mention one of the guys who's been helping me primarily build the website and done a ton of work with base colors, and that's Avinash Nayak. You can go follow him at Avinash Nayak. Hopefully I got that right, saying it out loud. I would know it if I wrote it, but I think that's right. Um, I will give to a tie between Dan and Varun for building Farcaster in the first place.
Wow, I'm so honored to be a part of this list. Thank you so much.
It's your
Um,
question, so I just again, you ask the right question. Sometimes you get a good answer.
yeah, but lovely answers. I will make sure to tag all these folks though for this episode so they get that shout out. Cool. Last question. What's like one feature you always wish that Farcaster had that doesn't exist? Doesn't have to be a feature.
If
Just
you could change the color of your interface based on what base colors you own.
oh my god, that's actually that's genius. They should do that. Maybe we should propose that. Try to send out a tweet. Oh, sorry, Kaz.
Yeah, I don't want to go come over too hard on the base colors plugging, but
I got
after
you.
it's hopefully been, yeah, you go for it. I'll boost it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for this rapid fire. This was fun. I really enjoyed talking to you, Jake, and I'm really excited for your future with for base colors and your podcast. And good luck to you and the team for that.
Thank you. Likewise, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you for all the thoughtful questions. And looking forward to following the show in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.